The cold came first, before thought, before memory, before the slow, gray crawl of consciousness that pulled him up from sleep like a hand reaching through water. The cold arrived. It pressed against the side of his face that was not buried in the pillow. It settled into the spaces between his fingers. It lived in the room the way cold lives in old places, not as a visitor but as a resident. Something that had always been there and had simply been polite enough to wait until now to introduce itself. He did not open his eyes immediately. There was a sound he was listening for without knowing he was listening. A breath, the small shift of weight on old floorboards, the scrape of a kettle, something that would tell him the cabin was still occupied by more than just himself. Nothing came. Only wind, moving through pine branches somewhere beyond the walls. Only the low, defeated hiss of a fire that had burned through the night and was now deciding whether it had the will to continue. Only silence, and not the comfortable kind. The kind that has a shape. The kind that fills a room the way water fills a glass, right up to the rim, leaving no space for anything else. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was rough timber, smoke-darkened, familiar now after 3 days. Morning light pressed weakly through the single window, the color of dishwater, the color of something not yet decided. The candle on the table had burned to a small hill of wax, a hardened white tear frozen mid-fall over the edge of the holder. He turned. The other side of the bed was empty. He placed his hand there without thinking. The way you reach for something you already know is gone, because some part of you needs the confirmation of cold sheets over warm hope. The sheets were cold. Not the cold of someone who had just risen. The cold of someone who had been gone for some time. He sat up slowly, and understood, before he could fully form the thought, that she had left before he could. His name was Daniel. That was the simplest version of him, the one printed on the expired work ID still folded in his jacket pocket, the one his mother had used when she was disappointed, which was often. The more complicated version of him was a man who had been leaving places for the better part of a decade. Cities, jobs, relationships that had asked too much of him too soon. He was not cruel about it. He never slammed doors. He simply had a habit of reaching for his bag before the room got too warm, before the comfort became something he might actually need. He had told himself it was freedom. He had stopped examining that claim closely. The storm had caught him 3 days ago on the road north, a road he had taken for no better reason than it was the direction his car had been pointed when he decided to leave the last city. The rain had turned sideways. The visibility had dropped to almost nothing. And then, through the white static of the storm, a light, a cabin, set back from the road at the end of a dirt path, surrounded by pine forest on 3 sides. He had knocked with no real expectation. The door had opened. She stood in the frame with the firelight behind her, wearing a wool sweater 2 sizes too large, holding a mug with both hands the way people hold things when they need something to hold. She looked at him the way people look at unexpected things, not with alarm but with a kind of careful assessment. Taking inventory. He had said, "I'm sorry to bother you. My car, the road." She had stepped back from the door without a word. An invitation if he chose to read it as one. He had brought his bag inside. Her name was Mara. She had offered it the way people offer things they're not sure will be accepted, quickly, without ceremony, moving on before he could respond. The cabin was hers. Had been for 2 years. Before that, she didn't say, and the way she didn't say it told him it was not a silence born of forgetfulness. She had made up the small bed near the fireplace without being asked. She had made soup from things in the pantry without offering explanation. She had sat across from him at the small table and eaten without talking, and somehow, in a way he could not immediately explain, it was the least lonely meal he had eaten in years. He found her absence in pieces. Her coat, the heavy gray one she wore when she went to bring wood from the stack outside, gone from the hook by the door. Her boots, the worn brown ones with the broken left buckle she had never fixed, absent from the mat. The small canvas bag she kept on the shelf above the sink, the one he had never seen her open in front of him, gone. But the journal was still there. It sat open on the table beside the cold kettle. Not forgotten, placed. There was a difference he recognized immediately. Forgotten things are turned over, slid sideways, half beneath other things. Place things are parallel to the table edge. Centered. Deliberate. A flower lay pressed between two open pages. Something small and dried and purple, lavender perhaps, or something he had no name for. It left a faint ghost stain on the paper, a shadow of color that had once been vivid. He should not have read it. He read it. Most of it was written in a hand so small and compressed it seemed like a language designed to take up as little space as possible. The handwriting of someone who had learned to make themselves smaller over time. Dates. Small observations. The kind of entries that were not for anyone, that were only ever a woman talking to herself in the only room where she felt safe enough to do so. But near the back, the entries changed. They became shorter, more clipped, the dates closer together. And a name began to appear, just a name, never accompanied by anything warm. R. Came to the town again. Saw his car outside the post office. Did not stop. And later, R. Know someone who knows where I moved. I think. I'm not sure. I need to be ready. And later still, in handwriting that was slightly less controlled than the rest. If he finds me here, I'll have to leave again. I've been leaving for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stay. He set the journal down. The pressed flower remained on the table, small and still and unexplained. He stood in the cold cabin and understood that she had not simply left this morning. She had been preparing to leave long before he knocked on her door. The question that settled in his chest, quiet and heavy as a stone. Why did she leave now and not before? He thought about the 3 days. He had not intended to stay 3 days. The storm had broken by the second morning. The road was passable. His car started fine. There had been no practical reason to remain. But she had been making coffee when he came in from checking the car, and she had poured a second cup without asking, and he had sat down and somehow the morning had passed. She was careful with words. Used them like someone who had learned they could be taken and used against you. Sparingly, with precision, taking them back whenever possible. But she listened in a way that was almost physical. When he spoke, she went entirely still. Not politely still. Genuinely still, the way animals go still when they're paying close attention to something that might matter. He had told her more than he meant to. Not the hard things. Not yet. But the shape of him, the constant moving, the sense of never quite landing anywhere, the feeling of watching other people's lives from slightly outside them, like a man with his face pressed against a lit window in the cold. She had listened to all of it without offering comfort or advice. When he finished, she had simply said, I know that window. He had looked at her. She had looked back, and then looked away, as if she had given something away by accident. Later that day, she had laughed. A real laugh, sudden and unguarded, at something ridiculous he had said about the firewood, and then the laugh had stopped as quickly as it had come, and something crossed her face that he could only describe as guilt, as though joy were a thing she had agreed not to indulge. He had seen it, and she had seen him see it, and neither of them had spoken about it. He had noticed the scar. It was on her left wrist, pale and thin, almost invisible unless the firelight caught it at the right angle. He had not stared. He had not asked. But she had noticed him not asking in the way that people notice careful silences, and for just a moment, something in her posture had shifted. A tiny, almost imperceptible relaxing of attention she had probably stopped noticing she carried. By the third day, something had changed between them. Not dramatically. Nothing had been declared or decided. It was more like a temperature shift, the way a room gradually becomes warmer without anyone stoking the fire, and you only notice when you realize you've taken off your coat. They had talked through that evening. Really talked. The kind of conversation that moves slowly through deep water, unhurried, aware of its own weight. He had said things he had not said to anyone. She had answered in the language of someone slowly, cautiously learning to trust the ground beneath their feet. And then at some point, late, the fire low, he had said it. I'll leave at first light. He did not know, even now, why he had said it in that exact moment. Maybe because the warmth had become frightening. Maybe because it was easier to name his leaving than to name what he might be feeling instead. Maybe it was simply habit. The announcement of departure had become so practiced it emerged unbidden, a reflex, a safety measure disguised as honesty. She had looked at him across the dying fire. She had not argued. had not asked him to stay, had simply looked at him with eyes that held something he could not fully read, something layered and old and tired, and, somewhere beneath all of that, something that might have been a decision being made. She had nodded. Okay, she had said. Just that. And then she had gone to bed. He had not known about the knock until he found the journal entry. But now, reading back, he remembered, 2 nights ago she had gone rigid mid-sentence. Every light in the cabin had gone off. She had pressed her back against the wall beside the door with a stillness that was not calm. It was the stillness of someone who had practiced it, who had needed to practice it. "Don't make a sound," she had breathed. Less than a whisper. He hadn't. Whoever had knocked did not knock again. After a long time, 10 minutes perhaps longer, she had turned the lamp back on. Her hands were steady. Her face was composed. She had returned to the conversation as though they had merely paused for something unremarkable. He had not pressed her. He wished now that he had, because the name in the journal R. and the knock in the dark and her packed canvas bag and the 2 years alone in this cabin at the edge of a forest. They assembled themselves now into a picture that made his jaw tighten and his hands close into fists at his sides. She had not left because of him. She had left for him. She had left so that whatever was coming would not arrive at a door where someone else was standing. He grabbed his jacket from the chair. He went fast, out the door and into the cold morning air, which hit him like a flat hand. The snow was thin on the ground. A dusting, enough to hold prints. Her boot prints were clear. Heading north into the tree line, following the narrow path through the pines that he had seen her use before, the one that met the road after about a quarter mile. He followed them at a run. The forest was gray and still. His breath came in hard white bursts. Branches caught at his sleeves. Twice he slipped on ice beneath the snow and caught himself on a trunk, bark rough against his palm, and kept moving. The prints were steady. She had been walking, not running, taking her time. Someone who had done this before. He heard voices before he saw them. He slowed, moved through the trees toward the sound, quiet now, stepping carefully. Through the last stand of pines, at the place where the forest opened onto the road, he saw them. She stood at the tree line with her canvas bag over one shoulder and her gray coat buttoned to the throat. And she was facing a man who stood beside a dark car parked half on the road's shoulder. He was broad-shouldered, well-dressed in the way of someone who understood the message that clothing sends. He was speaking to her in a low, even voice, the kind of voice that has learned to make control sound like calm. She was not backing away. That was the first thing he noticed. She was standing very still, yes, but not with the stillness of fear. With the stillness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the world to catch up to it. He stepped out of the trees. She turned at the sound of his footsteps. The expression that crossed her face was layered and rapid. First shock, then something fierce and protective that he understood meant go back, then something she couldn't control, something that broke through the armor briefly before she could reassemble it. Something that looked like relief. The man by the car turned too. He was older than Daniel had expected, colder-eyed, the kind of handsome that is really just the architecture of authority. "Who are you?" the man said. "Someone who's not leaving," Daniel said. It was not a planned answer. It arrived fully formed from somewhere beneath thought, from the place where things are true before you have decided to let them be true. The man's eyes moved between them. "Mara," he said, "this is unnecessary." "No," she said. Her voice was quiet and completely level. "It really isn't." And then she said other things, things that had clearly been waiting a long time to be said, accumulated over 2 years of silence and running and learning to sleep lightly and keeping a bag packed by the door. She said them without theatrics, without tears, in the same careful, measured language she used for everything, as if she had rehearsed this not for effect, but simply because she had wanted to be accurate when the moment came. Daniel did not interrupt. He stood slightly behind and beside her, not in front, not blocking her, not rescuing her, just present, just a body in the cold morning air that was not going anywhere. And when she finished, he said the thing that had been building in him for 3 days, that he had been trying to leave behind along with everything else. "She's not alone anymore." 6 words. Simple, unqualified. He watched them land. The man by the car looked at him for a long time with the calculating look of someone assessing what a thing will cost. Whatever he found in Daniel's face, it apparently clarified the math. He looked at Mara once more. Not a look of love, nothing so generous as that, but the look of someone recalculating an investment. He got back in his car. The door closed. The engine turned. The car moved away down the road and became small and then was gone around a bend, leaving only the sound of wind in the pines and the faint smell of exhaust dissolving into cold air. They stood in the silence it left behind. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The road was empty in both directions. The forest stood around them, quiet and enormous and indifferent in the best possible way. The indifference of old things that have witnessed many small human dramas and found them neither amusing nor tragic, only briefly interesting. She exhaled. It was a long exhale. The kind that carries something out of the body that has been stored there under pressure for longer than one morning, longer than one encounter, longer perhaps than she could easily measure. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Just a fraction, but he saw it. He wanted to say something. He found he had nothing that was adequate, and for once in his life, he did not try to fill the silence with something inadequate. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry. They were also the most unguarded he had ever seen them. All 3 days of careful management set aside, just for this moment, just here in the snow at the edge of the road where no one was watching and nothing needed to be performed. "You didn't leave," she said. "No," he said. "You were going to." "I know." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she looked down at the canvas bag on her shoulder. She set it down in the snow. It was a small gesture, but it was not a small thing. He looked at it there in the snow between them, and something settled in his chest. A long-held tension releasing, quiet as a key turning in a lock. He reached out his hand. She looked at it for a second. Then she took it. They stood there in the cold, in the snow, at the edge of the forest and did not speak, because there was nothing that needed saying more than what was already being said by two people who had stopped, finally, in the same place at the same time. They walked back through the trees together. The cabin was exactly as he had left it. Door open, cold air having moved through and settled into everything. He pulled the door shut behind them. She set her bag not on the shelf but on the floor near the door, in the way of someone who is not yet certain enough to fully unpack, but certain enough to set the bag down. He knelt at the fireplace. There were still embers, barely, but enough. He fed them small pieces of kindling with patient attention, the way you tend something fragile that still wants to live. Slowly, reluctantly at first, then with growing conviction, the fire rebuilt itself. She filled the kettle. The sounds of it, water and flame, and the small domestic percussion of two people moving in a shared space, filled the cabin in a way that the silence had not. A different kind of fullness, a warmer kind. He found a new candle in the drawer where she kept them. He replaced the melted one, lit it, set it back on the table. The light it cast was small and steady and gold. She brought 2 mugs of coffee and set them on the table. She sat down across from him. He sat. They wrapped their hands around the mugs the way people wrap their hands around warm things, not out of coldness alone, but out of some older instinct toward comfort, toward the holding of something good. He looked at her across the table. She was looking at the candle flame with an expression he was beginning to be able to read, not fully, not yet, but the way you begin to understand a language after long enough immersion. Not word by word, but in feeling, in impression, in the emotional register beneath the literal meaning. She was not afraid right now. She was here. "You left early," he said, "before first light." She was quiet a moment. Then, "I always leave before anyone has to watch me go." He turned his mug in his hands slowly. "That's not the same as leaving first." She looked up at him. "No," she said softly. "I suppose it isn't." He thought about all the times he had left. The bags packed quietly, the doors closed behind him, the road stretching out ahead offering the clean, uncomplicated promise of distance. He had always believed leaving was something he did. He understood now, for the first time, that it was also something he had been doing to people. A thing he had dressed up as independence and offered as freedom when it was, perhaps, simply fear with better luggage. She had left this morning to protect him from watching her go. He had chased the dawn to make sure she knew she didn't have to go at all. The fire crackled. The candle held its small, dependable light. Outside, the morning was brightening incrementally. That slow, unhurried brightening of a winter day that makes no promises but arrives anyway, faithful as breath. He did not say, "Stay." He did not say, "I'll stay." He simply did not reach for his bag. And she simply did not stand up. And between the two of them, in the warm and quiet cabin at the edge of the forest, that was enough. That was, for now, everything. Two people learning, carefully, slowly, with the particular tenderness of those who have been careless with themselves for too long, how to remain. The candle burned. The fire held. The morning came,